Good evening, everybody. We're going to get started here in a couple minutes. If I could ask you, if you have a cell phone or something that makes noise, if you could please turn it on silent mode before we get started, I'd appreciate that. All right, and with that, we'll kick things off. If you please rise, remove your hats, and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your service.
I pledge allegiance
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. We have a great crowd tonight. Obviously, we have a great speaker. I know we have at least one World War II veteran in the audience. I see another one. If there's other World War II veterans in the audience, could you raise your hand or stand if able? Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you very much. And any other veterans? If you have served in the military or are currently serving, if you please raise your hand and give everybody a big round of applause for everybody who's current or former veterans. Thank you, I really appreciate that. Also want to remind everybody that we're a nonprofit organization, and so one of the ways we fundraise is through the Helmet Committee. So when you exit the room, you'll see some gentlemen holding helmets. And if you feel like contributing, we will gladly accept donations of any type. And if you have a credit card, just make sure you give us the zip code, and I think we'll be good to go for that. We'll take credit cards. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to do kind of a throwback. Well, one public service announcement, I think, first of all. There was a pair of glasses that Laura's holding up. They were found in that vicinity 2 months ago at the last meeting, so that would be March. So 2 readers, if somebody is missing some glasses from last meeting or know who that person is, we have those glasses for you. And I want to do a throwback to something that we used to do a few years ago, and that's this month in World War II history. So here's a couple things that happened in May of 1945. First of all, the German surrender started, and so I want to hit on that. Bernard Montgomery's headquarters and the 7th United States Army captured Innsbruck, Salzburg, and Berchtesgaden. On May the 7th, German General Alfred Jodl signed an unconditional surrender at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. On May 8th, it's Victory Day in Europe, in Berlin, and Winston Churchill announced Germany's unconditional surrender on the radio. And that same day, Hermann Goering gave himself up to Americans in Austria and was captured and interrogated shortly thereafter. And those events were obviously made possible by the people involved in the war effort. And we have a great speaker tonight to tell you about some of those events and the experiences that he had that led to that surrender 78 years ago this week. So our speaker tonight is Robert Thompson, but his friends call him Bob. So does his family. So Bob was inducted into military service in March of 1943. He completed his infantry and other training at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and at Alabama Polytech in Auburn before finishing at Camp Shelby in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He was deployed to Europe in mid-June 1943 and later joined the 2nd Infantry Division, landing on Utah Beach in Normandy in France in July of 1944. He fought through Normandy, the hedgerows, and later across the hilly peninsula of Brittany. And in December of 1944, the 2nd Infantry Division held fast in its position at the Battle of the Bulge. It was also in December of 1944 that Robert was captured by German soldiers and became a POW at Stalag 13 Charlie in Germany. He was also at 2 other stalags, but I'm sure he's going to tell us about that. He was liberated by U.S. troops in late April of 1945 and discharged from the military service in November 11th of 1945. After the war, he attended Drexel Institute and got his Bachelor of Science in engineering, and in 1956 got his master's, or he got his MBA rather. He was married in 1949, and he has 4 children, 13 grandkids, and 14 great-grandkids. I think the thing I'm most proud of from your resume is that your son actually joined the Air Force. So I think that's a pretty large accomplishment that you should brag about tonight. He also has a grandson that enlisted in the Army Reserve. So with that, without further ado, I'm going to stop talking. I will also announce actually that there's a book about him that we advertise, and this is available for sale in the lobby after the program, and he'd be happy to sign a book for you. So with that, Bob, would you please come forward? The stage is yours.
You go ahead now. There we go. Now just check the volume and go over to that rail. Okay. Not that I don't trust your shoulder. Thank you, Jeff. I thought I was going to have an interpreter.
I'll come up for the questions.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Bob Thompson. I thank your organization very much for the invite. This is amazing, the turnout. It's overwhelming. I never expected it. Anyhow, Jeff pretty well covered the vital statistics where I grew up, Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, and drafted there. Sort of interesting thing, right that day, the notice came. My birthday was October the 17th, birthday 24. I graduated in the class of 1942, and on October 18th of 1942, I got a postcard in the mail. No envelope, just a postcard. Telling me to report to the draft board on such and such a date. I just mentioned that because today of the Privacy Act, and they send you a postcard to tell you you've been drafted. Well, anyhow, that's how it all started. Greetings, it said on a postcard. And after a little hitch at New Cumberland for a couple days, I was off to Fort McClellan, Alabama, for IRTC, that's Infantry Replacement Training Center. It was 13 weeks, and from there they sent me to ASTP, which was Army Specialized Training Program, which was essentially college. I went to Auburn, Alabama. That's one of the great things, one of great things that Congress ever did, I think, was this ASTP. It solved a lot of problems. The Army was accumulating troops as fast as they could and training them, and then they had to find a place to put them because the shooting hadn't started. And the British Isles were in danger of sinking from the infusion of troops. And so they turned to the colleges, started sending new recruits to college. And it was, obviously a great win for us. Most everybody got at least a year of credits. And not only that, it saved the colleges because of lack of attendance, of course. And this influx kept them solvent. So it was, ASTP was a win-win situation. Unfortunately, things started to heat up near the end of 1943, and we moved on to a mobilization, I guess you'd call it, and by June, of course, we had D-Day, and now, you're all interested in World War II history, I presume. Unfortunately, for me, I speak of the ETO only, European Theater of Operations. D-Day being June the 6th, I was on the high seas on June the 6th, heading for Liverpool. Let me backtrack for just a spell. The ASTP broke up in pieces by the end of October of 1943 and early December. And everybody was integrated back into the Army. And you have to excuse me, I get some, at my age, I go blank sometimes. But anyhow, we're getting integrated back into the Army, and I was sent to the 69th Infantry Division in Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Now, the 69th Infantry Division was a training division. They filled it up to TO, that's Table Organization, a fully staffed division of recruits. And they trained you for maybe 5 months, 6 months, and then they would break the division up and send the troops overseas as replacements. This was after D-Day. Well, it coincided with the D-Day invasion, and I went overseas as a replacement for the 2nd Infantry Division. That's the Indian Head Division, and landed in Liverpool, took a train across to, now I just, mind you, I'm now 20 days past D-Day. The invasion has been successfully pulled off, and I landed in Utah Beach on the, as I say, 20 days after D-Day, and joined I don't know whether any of you ever heard of a repo depot, but it's a replacement depot. And we were in a replacement depot right on the English Channel. And eventually got assigned to the various divisions. And my assignment was the 2nd Division and the A Company of the 23rd Infantry. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the Normandy campaign. That's where we were, Normandy. It's a little peninsula. It's not a very big one. And it's full of hedgerows. You've probably heard the relationship between Normandy hedgerows and Normandy hedgerows. Doesn't matter. But the hedgerows were less than an acre. They were big fields. And the hedgerows was originated from centuries of moving rocks out of the field and piling them on the edge. And they pile up, the wind blows, the dust, dirt covers the rocks over centuries, and then foliage. Some little bushes, some pretty good-sized trees grow on these things. Well, and it was like a checkerboard. They were, my guess, some of those fields were maybe like 60 by 60, or maybe 100 by 100 in area. And the hedgerows provided excellent cover for the Germans. Actually, the hedgerows provided an excellent defensive issue for the Americans. It was hard to flush out people from the hedgerows. It had to be done with artillery. So Normandy was pretty much a artillery battle. When I say pretty much, almost 100%. It was just a typical morning in Normandy. The ground would start to shake at dawn, and it was our artillery. The short range, the 75s were up front, and then the 105s were a mile back maybe, and then the 155s a half a mile back yet. And they went for 45 minutes non-stop, blasting the terrain in front of us. And then they shut them off, and then the infantry would move in and take over that, hopefully be able to, hopefully that the artillery had cleared the way. Sometimes it had, sometimes it almost had. So there was often fighting, but it was generally more artillery. It was the way to do it. That third word I was trying to think of when I said you've heard of Normandy, hedgerows, and 88s. The 88 was a German artillery piece. It was their #1 weapon. It was actually an anti-aircraft, designed for an anti-aircraft weapon. It was a high velocity, very high velocity gun. It scared you, the noise coming in. However, if it missed you, first of all, the hedgerows, they couldn't penetrate a hedgerow, so that was good. We were safe as long as we had a hedgerow. if you got caught outside of a hedgerow and the shell hit in front of you, it was the end. You were dead. If the shell missed you, generally you survived. A little concussion perhaps, but all the shrapnel went straight ahead due to the velocity of those shells. In other words, the velocity of the shell overcame the velocity from the explosion that sent the shrapnel out, and everything went straight ahead. So they were a terrifying piece of equipment, and that was the now a mortar. On the other hand, if this was a field and this was a hedgerow all the way around it, you're pretty safe from the artillery, or from the 88 artillery, unless you're on the wrong side of the hedgerow. If they used mortars, the mortars came in an arc and generally landed pretty straight down, and when they blew up, the shrapnel went 360 degrees, and 2 or 3 mortar shells inside a field could wound or kill the whole company or whatever platoon that was in that field. They accounted for probably, a historian may disagree with me, but I wouldn't be surprised if the infantry lost more troops to mortars than they did the 88s. Even though the 88s created more panic. Well, anyhow, Normandy was that battle. It was slow. It took 2 months, June, July, and August, 3 months. 3 months. And finally, the Normandy campaign was over, officially. And then the 2nd Division made a U-turn. And we headed back to England, fighting on the Brittany Peninsula. And we were going backwards, or going now west instead of east. And we were after the port of Brest, B-R-E-S-T, which was the tip of the Brittany Peninsula, of the Brittany Peninsula. So the Brittany campaign was entirely different than the Normandy campaign. First of all, there were no hedgerows. Why? I don't know. And I never asked Google. But anyhow, it was the Germans did not put up much of a fight in Normandy. It was still war. We had casualties, but the initial parts of the campaign in Normandy were pretty quiet. The Germans pulled into the ports on the side of the peninsula. On the north side of the Brittany Peninsula, there was one major port called St. Malo. On the south side of the peninsula was St. Nazaire, St. Laurent, and Brest, and Brest being the tip. And the Germans pulled up into those ports, and believe it or not, why they stayed there the rest of the war. The Americans just ignored them. They put some troops on to keep them in there, and they allowed the Germans to come in via the boat and provide food for their troops. And that's a little story about Normandy that's, Brittany, excuse me, that never got much publicity. But now the town on the north side, that's St. Malo, they were provided food from some of the Channel Islands. I don't know if you recall, in the Channel Islands, where some of them were in British control, and some of them the Germans had captured. And so they had some of the Channel Islands, and that's how they supplied St. Malo. The other ports that were on the south side, that was the Sea of Biscay. And if you crossed the Sea of Biscay southwise, well, you were in Spain. And I don't know how they fed those troops. I never. But anyhow, the Normandy campaign culminated in Brittany campaign culminated in a street fighting for the town of Brest. And but they wanted this, Brest was one of the biggest, with Marseille actually, Brest was one of the biggest seaports in France. So the Allies wanted it desperately to take care of the troops in the southern, central and southern part of France on the push to Germany. And but they never got Brest. When the fighting was stopped, well, you could sweep Brest up with a dustpan and brush. It was devastated. And its use as a port was not possible. It fell. The Brittany campaign ended with the taking of Brest, and it was at the end of September. And about the 1st of October, they put us on a train, and the train went from Brest to Paris and on to a place called Ardennes. I don't know if you ever heard of Ardennes or not, but it's a pretty good-sized town, and it's almost within walking distance of where Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, and France meet. And at that point, we got off the train on the trucks and went up and took positions in the Ardennes. Now, the Ardennes was the reason we were stalled, and the U.S. Army was stalled essentially at the Siegfried Line. We had the Siegfried Line. We were beyond it, and but we couldn't go any further because of supplies. Where we were out of primarily gasoline, but other things too. Winter clothes were short supply, and it's now, mind you, October 1st. And well, the Ardennes was for us almost a rest camp. We were there from the 1st of October, November, and until December the 12th. So we were there for 2.5 months in the Ardennes. To the best of my knowledge, not a shot, I mean, in our area at least, not a shot was fired. And it was wet, rain, and as I say, the reason we were stalled was our own supplies. We were kaputs. And then Then the Germans surprised everybody on the 15th of December by attacking. And that, of course, was called the Battle of the Bulge. Now, I'm going to stop right there for a minute and go back to Normandy. When I landed in Normandy, I was a PFC, excuse me, and joined A Company. And the second night I was in Normandy, they said, "You're doing a patrol tonight." I said, "Okay." I didn't have room to say anything else, but they explained that, well, first of all, the 2nd Infantry Division was the northernmost outfit in the front, and the northernmost of the Americans. To our left were the British. And, well, they told me that I should walk north till I find a road. Now, they had maps. Unfortunately, they had no compasses, so how in the middle of the night you knew which way was north, I don't recall that one. But, and when you get to this road, why contact the British? Well, my first question, of course, is, well, do you turn left or do you turn right? Now, mind you, we're walking north. Well, I knew one thing in my mind, I was not going to turn right. That would have been east. And I turned west for the channel in case I got lost. At least I had the English Channel somewhere in the background. Well, fortunately, I didn't have to walk far anyway. I walked north, or at least I think I was going north. I found the road, turned left, and did not walk very far when a voice said, "Halt, password." And I recognized the accent right away. They were British. And, but no one had told me that I needed a password. And I forget what, well, I know what I said, which I won't repeat. But I said, "Oh my, I'm a Yank." And that seemed to do the trick. That was good enough. They let me in. I had a spot of tea, and I eventually started back for the American side. So that was my indoctrination, you might say, to war, I guess. And another interesting thing, then the next feature was, I don't know whether it was the fact that I did this patrol or what it was, but a week or so later, I wound up as squad leader. And then the next step, I was squad leader, and one day we had we had some high ground. It was not a mountain or anything, just some high ground. And we spent the day there, and it was a quiet day. Now, the American Army had a fetish in Normandy. They wanted to keep that line straight as it progressed across Normandy. And that's pretty hard to do, because sometimes some divisions have more success than other divisions on a given day. So sometimes you have to wait for somebody that's lagging to get caught up and what have you. But for whatever reason, we were not doing much this day. And around dusk, we learned that they were going to send a ranger battalion through our lines for some hush-hush mission. Well, that ruffled our feathers a little bit. You have to wonder what a Ranger battalion can accomplish that we couldn't. But anyhow, if we didn't let that worry us, we didn't have to do anything they did. And sure enough, at dusk, which happened to be 11 p.m., the Rangers came, about 20, 24 Rangers. And they went through our lines, disappeared into the darkness, went down the hill, and we went back to bed. That was about 11, and about 1:30, 2 o'clock, who comes back but the Rangers? And of course, we gave them the business verbally. Was it scary out there? And rubbed their feathers a little bit, but they left. And we settled down to try and sleep again. And I got wakened and said, Thompson, take your squad out there. I said, where's out there? Well, I don't recall the answer, but I got the message. And I only had 5 men, 6 including myself. And so we went out. The 6 of us. The Rangers had fortunately beat the underbrush down, so it was easy, even in darkness, to follow use the same trail they used. And we got down to the bottom of the hill, and it was a crossroad, and there was a house on one of the corners, a big French manor house, and they had to walk out to the, and I call these roads generously. They were lane, maybe, cow path. They weren't much, but they were means of transportation. And we stopped, and I told them, this is it for the night. And then by now, of course, it's 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever, and we're pretty sleepy. So I said to my assistant squad leader, Byron Cooper, I said, these guys will never make it through the night. You and I had better pull guard duty. Now he agreed. So the 2 of us sat down on this curb at the end of this walk that led up to the manor house. It was right near the intersection. And we proceeded to fall asleep. And the next thing I know, it's now dawn. I don't know the time, but there's a guy shaking me. And it was a soldier. And he had on a brown uniform. And the Germans never wore brown. That was not their colors. They never had brown uniforms. And this guy could not speak English, but they found a guy that could speak English. There were 40 of them. They were Hungarians, conscripted Hungarians, conscripted by the Germans. And somehow they'd gotten away from the Germans. Well, once I got the message of what it was, I started worrying about where's the Germans. And there was a boy from Easton, Pennsylvania, Philip Bondurado. I said, take these guys and back up the hill and back to the outfit, which they did. And the other 5 of us, we brought up the rear in case Germans were chasing them. And that's the end of the story. I never found out, I always wanted to read the morning report, But unfortunately, our morning reports went up in flames in 1950-something at St. Louis in a disastrous fire. So I could never find out what that was all about. I sort of assumed that the army had a pre-arrangement for the surrender of these 40 Hungarians, and for some reason, with the Rangers, it didn't gel for whatever. Somebody didn't show up, but I don't know. Anyhow, that was some of the Normandy events. The Bulge, from there on, we went to the Ardennes, spent 2.5 months up there, sort of on R&R almost, except if it hadn't rained every day, we're doing pretty nice duty. And we were dug in. Our engineers made, like Valley Forge reminded me of. I mean, they were well, they were dug in the side of a hill, so the hill made one side of your dugout. And then they had logs, like a log cabin, and then put logs on the roof, and then sandbags, and then sod. And believe it or not, those things were watertight, and we lived in them quite well. There were 6 bunks per dugout, but that until the 15th of December, it was 12th, excuse me, 12th of December, the 106th Infantry Division relieved the 2nd. And now we had 3 regiments in a division. I was in the 23rd Infantry. The other 2 regiments were the 9th and the 38th. And when we left the rest area I was telling you about, well, they went on the attack. There were the 2 regiments, the 9th and the 38th. Things got completely out of hand. We had 2 regiments attacking. In the meantime, the Germans attacked the 99th Division to open a battle of the Bulge, and our regiment had to go and back up the 99th Division and try and help out there. And we had the early days of the Bulge, it was confusion with a capital C. However, things got organized, and the 2nd Division was very instrumental in forming the northern edge of the Bulge along the Elsenborn Ridge. And eventually, the Germans did what the Americans were trying not to do. They ran out of gas. And that was pretty much really the end of the Bulge. However, we were, as I told you, the 23rd Infantry was in the defense of the 99th Division, and things fell apart pretty bad. First of all, we had no support whatsoever. That means heavy weapons or artillery or anything. We had nothing but rifles. And we had no defense to speak of. And then orders came to get out. Well, we got the orders to get out, and then they said 5 guys have to stay behind. And it's not a delaying action, but it was just occasionally we were told to pull off our shot and attempt to fool the crowds into thinking we were still there. And and the 5 of us stayed behind. I was one of the 5. And from there on, quick story, we found a town, Bullingen, in Germany. We got into a basement, spent the night. The next day was so overcast, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And you couldn't even tell where the sun should be, had the sun been up there, or visible. It was just, so we decided to stay another night until we could figure out where the sun was going to come up. And we had no compasses, of course. We never had what we needed. And that was, eventually the second day, where the Krauts moved in upstairs and we were in the basement. And that leaves sort of an untenable situation. And we were taken prisoner. Now, a lot of people think, oh my, that must have been awful. Well, I tell you, it was far from awful. It started a period when for 5.5 months, no one shot at me. And, you know, that was really appreciated. We paid for it dearly on things like food, and but anyhow, that's the way it was. And we spent a couple of days I guess with the Krauts trying to figure out what to do with us. By this time we had been consolidated with other people they'd captured. And there was, well, at least enough to fill a boxcar. And they put us on a train, and we went here and we went there. And it seemed like every place we went, they sent us back. And we were finally wound up in a stalag called Hammelburg. And that was home for the next, well, we got there just before, we got there between Christmas and New Year's. 28th of December, I believe, we got into Hammelburg and we settled down. And we were there until April 1st, March 31st. That particular year, I remember Easter Sunday was April Fool's Day, April 1st. And by that time, we were moved to, around the end of March, we were moved to another prison camp called Nuremberg. You all heard of Nuremberg, and it had an Air Force camp, and somehow we got into an Air Force camp, but that didn't matter. And at Nuremberg, on our arrival on March 31st, remind you, April 1st being Easter Sunday, 1944. No, what year would it be? D-Day was 44. So the next April was 45, yeah, sure. April 45, Easter Sunday. The Krauts gave us the best meal we'd ever had as a prisoner. It was some kind of stew, obviously horse, and veggies. Very good meal. And they even got a stick of chewing gum. And it boggled our mind after the food we'd put up with at Hammelburg. The food at Hammelburg consisted of a tub of liquid in the morning, You know, there were more adjectives for that tub of liquid than you could imagine. To call it coffee, that would be a total insult. Some kind of tea, maybe. The Germans actually called it ersatz. And, but anyhow, nobody drank it. And early on, some of the guys still had a razor blade. This was right after we were captured. And this stuff at least was warm. That's about the only thing it did. So they used it to shave. Well, after a week of shaving, they were turning sort of a yellowish red. And they had to give that up. So that was the end of, they kept bringing that darn juice, their buckets of stuff every morning, and never got touched. So somewhere they took it and dumped it. And then lunch was your prime mover. That was you got a bowl of soup. And it was a generous bowl of soup. Very generous. I mean, it was not a meager ration. And there were three primary soups. One was called beef barley. Again, we knew it was horse barley, but it was good. And that was the most popular soup. No, I shouldn't say that. The most popular soup was potato. But for some reason, with all the potatoes they had, that's the one we got the least of. And the third soup we called the Green Hornet. You know these big beets that are about this big? What are they? Sugar beets or cow beets? We call them cow beets over there. And they had a green on them. And the Krauts cut that green off and made a soup out of it. And it was awful. And most of the guys tossed it. And now, Hammelburg had two prison camps within one. One for officers and one for enlisted men. I was well, they actually had a third one. That was for an NCO, non-commissioned officers. And that's where I was, in the NCO one. Well, we had the Krauts brought in a medical officer, U.S. prisoner, that was had gotten captured, and he came down and he gave a speech to us about the Green Hornet soup and how what's the word? Good food. What's a synonym for good food? Help.
Nutritious.
Anyhow, it was how healthy it was. And eat your Green Hornet soup. Don't throw it away. It can save your life. It's the best soup that they have. And then anyhow, it started tasting better after a couple of months of getting nothing else. So, that was the Green Hornet. Back to Nuremberg, you can see why we appreciated that meal we got there on Easter Sunday. And we were very happy we were going out of Hammelburg and over at Nuremberg. The reason we were out of Hammelburg, and maybe you historical members remember the Patton's raid on Hammelburg? I told you Hammelburg had an off-flag officers camp in addition to the others. And in that camp was a Colonel John Waters, who was had been captured in Africa. And he was Patton's son-in-law, General George Patton's son-in-law. Well, Mr. Patton, in his infinite wisdom, sent a spearhead in from about 80 miles away to liberate this camp. And Hammelberg. Well, the spearhead got there, so did the Germans. Everybody in that party was either killed or wounded. 150 soldiers were in that rescue attempt. And they were all killed or wounded. And Patton died without denying 100% that he knew anything about his son being in that, or his son-in-law being in that prison camp. Well, the next day, they put us on a train and sent us to Nuremberg, and they closed Hammelberg. I guess they thought the Americans were getting too close. And things went pretty well at Nuremberg, only short-lived. We were there a couple days, and the British bombed Nuremberg every night. And before they came over, somehow they sent a plane over and they dropped green flares on each corner of that prison camp. And that marked a no-bomb zone. Now, actually, it wasn't close. In other words, the prison camp was actually nowhere near the industrial part that they were trying to bomb. But anyhow, that's the way they did it. And one night, one of these green flares misfired and landed on the kitchen. And the kitchen burned down. So that necessitated a sudden closure of that camp. And at that point, they put us on the road from Nuremberg down to a place called Moosburg, exactly 100 miles to the south. And we walked that 100 miles. We made it in 2 weeks. It was a kind of a hike. If you got tired and couldn't handle it too much longer, you could sit down and rest for a couple of days and get back up and get in line. There were thousands on this out of Nuremberg's prison camp, plus another group that joined us. And the hike was I wrote in my book, the hike was the greatest thing that happened to me in the prison camp. My gosh, first of all, the worst thing about being in Hammelberg, you got up in the morning and for excitement, you sat on the edge of your bed. And at 3 o'clock, you still had the same excitement sitting on the edge of your bed. And it's just nothing to do. And we'd run out of all the good stories we could tell, and it was boring, that's the word. So it was just so nice to get outdoors and be able to walk, and the weather was very cooperative. It was April 1st, and April 2nd or 3rd, and it was extremely cooperative, the weather. The scenery was more than cooperative, and God, here we go.
Bavaria.
What's that?
Bavaria?
Why don't you come up here? I can't hear you. Ardennes, did you say?
Bavaria? Were you trying to think of Bavaria? The
Well,
city of Bavaria?
what's the part of southern Germany? It just left me. What is southern Germany called?
Moosburg.
No, the whole area.
Black Forest?
No. Oh,
Not
God.
Bavaria.
Bavaria, sure. Bavaria. Yeah, hooray for Bavaria. Well, that was a great, I mean, I'm sure some of you have been to Bavaria, a beautiful country. And so we had scenery, we had all the food we started getting food. Red Cross packages. All of a sudden, the Krauts found Red Cross packages that some somehow I disappeared. I guess they miraculously found them as the Americans got close, but I guess they didn't want to get caught with a bunch of Red Cross packages. And we started getting Red Cross packages, and they were delicious. So the food picked up, the weather, just being outside, that was, I wrote that in my book, and I got a letter from a guy who said, "What the hell hike were you on?" He didn't share the same, anyhow, we got to Mooseburg. Unfortunately, at that point, I had something. Hepatitis, right. So I was pretty sick at times as far as the hepatitis was concerned. But I did get an airplane ride out of Bavaria up to Reims, France, and spent 30 days recuperating there from, the recuperation was pretty good. When I hit that hospital, I couldn't keep a thing down. And they gave me a bowl of oatmeal. And I could put all the sugar on I wanted. They dabbed a little, that powdered milk on it. And boy, that tasted good and stayed down. So I lived 10 days at least on nothing but oatmeal. Anytime I wanted, I'd put my hand up and they brought me a bowl of oatmeal. And we got, 10, 2, and 4, we got eggnog. I think I weighed about 114 pounds. And it was, but anyhow, in 30 days I was in Paris, having recovered, and we got a very stern lecture before we left Soissons. And it was an American officer, and he really laid the law to us. He says, the boss says, you're going to Paris. He says, don't ask me why, it's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard of, but you're going to Paris. And our mission is stay out, this gentleman was black and he had a very black accent, and stay out of them bistros. They'll kill you. And he said, in all seriousness, he said, well, it's hepatitis and what you guys have had, malnutrition, this, if you want to have your funeral before you get home, why, have a good time in Paris and drink. But he says, stay away from the booze. Don't even go in, check it out. So I towed the line and recovered rather quickly. Now, my daughter said, well, I ain't got home. My daughter said not to miss the Ted Baird story. Well, when I got to Hammelburg, I told you there were 5 of us that were captured, and it was hard to sleep. Well, in Hammelburg, a bunk was 3 tiers, and you had 2 men in each tier. So you had 2, 4, 6 sleeping in a tier of 3 bunks. And so sleeping with someone else, 5 didn't come out even. And I started looking around there. Actually, the other 5 guys were a little rotund anyhow. And when I saw we were going to sleep 2 to a bunk, I started looking for someone with a little less volume. And this fellow, Ted Baird, was from Philadelphia. That's how we got together. He was with the 99th Division. He was 6'5". He was thin, so he just fit the bill, except our feet got cold. And he was my bunkmate. And now we got the Krauts gave us a piece of letter paper, and a postcard once a month to write home. And Ted was a little skeptical of the whole thing, and paper was a premium, as you might guess. There was no sanitary paper available. So Ted chose not to write. I chose to write. And one of my letters, which also is in the book, said, I shared my Red Cross package today with a guy from Philadelphia, Edgar W. Baird III. And I said, his father was a GOP political big shot and was a former city treasurer. And, okay, put the letter in the mail. In the meantime, my parents had gotten a telegram, your son is missing in action. And my father starts calling the Red Cross, see if they heard anything. He gave them my vitals, name, rank, serial number, etc. And a very compassionate woman on the other end said, Mr. Thompson, if we hear anything, we'll let you know immediately. And knowing my father, he probably needled her frequently after that. And then one day she told my father her name. And okay. And shortly thereafter, my letter arrives from the prison camp and says, my bunkmate is Edgar W. Baird. Oh, my father's hair went straight up. That's the woman she'd been talking to. It's his mother. How small a world you could expect to find. So it worked out. They were a very nice family, had a nice place up on Buzzards Bay in New England, and I spent the better part of the summer of '45 up there with them, and it was quite a small world thing. Unfortunately, every one of them has now passed. Another story she wanted me to tell you was when I told you back in Normandy, I suddenly was thrust in as a squad leader. And one of the very first candidates, or one of the very first recruits that I received was the boy from Easton, Philip Underado. And I thought it was a good idea. In Normandy, even though we had some protection from the hedgerows, we dug, not a foxhole, but a trench about anywhere from 12 to 18 inches deep to sleep in. And so this boy was having a little problem. Well, actually, he wasn't any boy. That's what the problem was. He was 28 years old and had 2 sons. Had no business being in the infantry in Normandy at all. I don't know. But anyhow, he was there. And fortunately lived to tell the story. But anyhow, I said, Philip, we'll dig in together. And okay, so that way I handed him the shovel, so there was method in my madness. And see, we went to bed, and I, heard this rattle, and shake, rattle, and roll hadn't started yet. And I thought, no, well, I was 18 years old, and I was a Quaker, and believe it or not, I had no idea what a rosary was. Not the least idea. Well, he had his rosary out. And I don't know whether he was shaking it out of the fact he had the shakes for his first night in combat, or whether it was a ritual, that went with the. But I let him. Finally, I rolled over and I said, Philip, I said, whatever you have there, I said, I'm a Quaker. And we Quakers believe very strongly in silent worship. And he got the message. So that hits things pretty well on the head, so why don't we switch over to Q and A?
All right, thank you. We have, just like in the past, we have 2 microphones. I'll have this side of the room, and Chris will have that side. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll get you the microphone as soon as possible. I'll walk the aisles, too.
I'd like to take a minute to introduce my daughter, Pat, who's going to field the question. My hearing is 98 years old, and the batteries are dying, and she's going to help.
I'll do a question here.
Hi, Bob. When you were in the train, when you were a POW, were you worried about American aircraft strafing you?
When you were a POW, were you worried about the U.S. strafing you all when you were in the boxcars or wherever?
No, although it did happen once. But the pilot realized it was a possibility, at least. There were POWs aboard, and he strafed the engine solely. In other words, he came at the engine 90 degrees rather than touching the train. That happened near Schweinfurt, Germany. But no, interesting enough, they made us get off the train after it was strafed, and then the Geneva Convention says you have to mark a train. The Germans never did this, but it was nevertheless within the Geneva Convention. You should take whitewash and paint the roof of the car POW, and then an arrow in the direction of the train's going. So we did that. The same train, the one that got while we were waiting for a new engine. The first engine was ventilated quite well. And
Sir, can you tell me if you recall how you got designated as one of the 5 who stayed in the Ardennes to delay your comrades? I just was wondering if you remembered how you got picked.
How were you chosen as one of the 5 in the Ardennes?
how
How were you chosen, selected?
well, I was the chooser. Yeah, I was the chooser, and I don't know. One of the theories I had, I wouldn't do something that I wouldn't ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself under. And that plus, well, you know, when you, we're 6 months after D-Day, right? Our confidence level is sky high. I think at least, maybe I'm speaking incorrectly for a lot of people, but at least for me, I thought the whole damn thing would blow over. And of course, it never did. But I thought the Bulge would be very short-lived. And it just didn't bother me. Even being in the basement, I thought, yeah, tomorrow morning, well, they're not going to leave bowling in German hands. But things didn't work out that way.
You were the leader of your squad. Could you tell us the names of the rest of your squad and what they were like?
Can you list the names of your squad members
Yeah.
and what they were like?
Yeah. My assistant squad leader was Byron Cooper, Milford, Delaware. He was an assistant postmaster in Milford, Delaware at one time. He was a Ford mechanic. Okay, Byron Cooper. I had a BAR team. One rather interesting guy, the BAR man was Orville Moody. Any golf fans here? Golf? Orville Moody, ring a bell? Pro golfer from way back now. No relation whatsoever, forget it. I mean, it just strictly had a name, Orville Moody. He was my BAR man. His assistant was Kid, K-I-D Perez. What his real name was, I never knew. P-E-R-E-Z, Kid Perez. He was a boxer. And he was from New Mexico. Mr. Moody was from Arizona. And Mr. Cooper, that leaves your boy from Easton, Pennsylvania, no boy, Philip Andorato. I-N-D-O-R-A-T-O. And is that 6?
That was 5, I think. Are you 6?
Oh, yeah, I'm 6, yeah. Bob Thompson, and the one before that, I had a Murray Seaman. He was a little Jewish boy from Brooklyn, Murray Seaman. And, that's about all I can do for you. Tell you my lieutenant.
I've read that replacement troops were not welcome a lot of times and when they were put in units. Did you have any difficulty being assimilated into a unit?
Any difficulty being a replacement when you came in?
No. Except being sent out on that patrol. Of course, I was stupid enough to know that you never ran a one-man patrol. We never ran another one in the history of the Army. But I've often thought privately about that. There was just 1 or 2 reasons, I guess, why I was selected. Was it a hazing? Possibly? I don't know. Or was it the fact that the TO for an infantry squad is 12 and we only had 6? Maybe they would figure they can't afford to lose any more than one.
Did you ever have to work in any of the POW camps?
Did you ever have to work when you were in any of the POW camps?
No. Now, the NCOs, the Germans respected rank a lot more than the Americans did. And NCOs were exempt from work.
I have a question, actually. Bob, I've been reading your book, very interesting. And in the combat in Brest, in Brittany campaign, you talked about in your book about a really interesting tactic about not wanting to kind of expose your guys to street fighting. I mean, on the actual street, to run on the street, but to go house by house, and they'd make a hole into a house and throw a grenade in, and then go into each house like parallel. Yeah, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah.
About the street fighting and from house to house.
Where'd you hear
In
about
Brest,
that?
in Brest, yeah.
Your book.
Oh, it's in my book.
Yes.
I had to read that book someday.
They take it. You said they. Oh, okay. Well, according to what I read, they said they would take a pickaxe and make a hole into a house like side by side, where you guys were, and then throw a grenade in, and then make a bigger hole, and you guys would all go through, and then repeat the process.
Now, understand, I only can talk about one area of the town of Brest, and it's the one I was in. There were pretty nice homes. They were all 3 stories. Obviously street fighting, if you're in the street, I mean, there's probably in the immediate area 50 windows from which you can be shot at. In other words, you're a target for 40, 50 windows. So it's really, you stay out of the street. Obviously, you have to break in at the end of the street into a house. Just knock the door down and get in the house. Well, we had, remember, 6 men. I had 2 men on the first floor, 2 men on the second floor, and 2 men on the third floor. And we had these pickmatics, and we'd start chipping away at the plaster, and it's not too difficult to get. We'd only be looking for a hole this big, maybe, and we'd throw a hand grenade in the hole, and hopefully that took care of anyone that was on the other side. And then we would go to the bigger, instead of the little pickmatics, now we have big sledgehammers. And we'd enlarge the hole so a man could crawl through. And it was slow, but we could cover a block in a day. There's no, I mean, well, first of all, we never ran into anything, so that helped. We never ran into a crowd in the houses. And now the crap game came at the end of the block, because you had to leave the house you were in. And we had a couple of tricks up our sleeves. We'd go a half a block away and set off a bunch of dummy, whatever we have will burn and make noise. It was just enough to attract attention, and we'd run from, this would be a half a block away from where we were, where we had to run across the street and get in the next block. That was, but it was all uneventful. We never lost never got shot at least our company. And my squad, we're uneventful. Yeah.
All right, well, I think it's time to close, so I'm going to invite Chris up for that. And while you're walking up, I just want to remind everybody that Bob's book will be in the back for sale. He'll be happy to autograph it. I want to thank, while you're coming up, thank you and your family for driving out here, and they're driving home tonight. So we'll be respectful of your time so you get home safe and sound in your own beds tonight. So, Chris, over to you.
Now, could I interrupt 1 minute? Mr. Jackson, don't leave without seeing me 1 second, okay? Thank you.
I just want to have a few closing remarks for everyone. And first of all, I want to thank you, just like Jeff thanked you, Bob, and your family for coming tonight. And it's so nice to meet you all. And thank you for your service, Bob. And I'm reading your book, so I'm really interested in your story. I've gotten through all the wartime actions and the POW actions, so really interesting. And thank you for your most recent answering my question a moment ago. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great presentation. Thank you. And so a few other announcements before I close for this evening. I'll try not to be too long. Okay, so thank you, of course, to Bob as well, and all other World War II veterans in attendance here, and all veterans in general. We thank you. Bill Jackson, our first president and founder, sitting right here in the front and center row here. Thank you for being our first president and for getting this idea started, which has now been rolling for 20 years. We do thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for being here. And now we also want to thank our other volunteers, and Jeff's one of them. Barb's right here. Thank you, Barb, and thank you all our board members. Mike's over here. We have Cliff in the back, and Laura's one of our key volunteers as well. And thank you, Helmet Committee in the back, and all of you guys that do your part. Thank you so much. I do need to, this is part of my announcements here, my paper here. Our next speaker will be June 1st, Dr. John McManus. Some of you know him from seeing him here before. He'll be coming back to talk about a new book, To the End of the Earth, about the 1945 Pacific Campaign, U.S. Army Pacific 1945. He'll be here June 1st, Dr. John McManus. Then in July, we hope to have Ed Buffman, a Navy World War II veteran on the USS Missouri. He was a veteran on that ship. He saw in person now, the September 2nd, 1945, formal surrender of the Japanese delegation there with MacArthur and the whole bit. So he can hopefully talk for us in July. Now, I'd be remiss if I don't say that if you're so inclined to support us in our efforts, and we do have expenses, then please, if you feel so kind, it's totally optional, but if you'd like to, we do have the gentleman in the back with the World War II helmets and helmet liners that will be happy to take your donations for us to keep us going. Thank you. And last and not least, I want to thank all of you for being here. You guys make it happen for us with your donations and for being here, your enthusiasm, and just your passion for World War II, which we all share. So thank you for being here tonight. Have a good night, and we'll see you in June. Thank you.